The story of Rolex, how an orphan boy created the most famous watch in the world, Rolex, a name that today stands for luxury, success, and prestige all over the world. Whether on the wrists of entrepreneurs, athletes, or heads of state, hardly any other brand enjoys a comparable reputation. Rolex is more than just a watch. For many people, it is a symbol of success. Yet only a few know the story behind this legendary brand. Because the story of Rolex does not begin with wealth, but with loss. With a boy who lost everything at an early age. And it was this very boy who would later change the world of watchmaking forever. Hans Wilsdorf was born on March 22, 1881 in Kulmbach, Bavaria in Germany. His family owned a successful hardware business and enjoyed a comfortable middle-class life. But that security disappeared faster than anyone could have imagined. When Hans was only 12 years old, both of his parents died within a short period of time. Suddenly, he was an orphan. For a boy in those days, that usually meant a difficult life filled with uncertainty. His uncles became guardians of him and his siblings. They sold the family business and sent the children to a boarding school in Coburg. For Hans, a challenging chapter began. He felt like an outsider, lonely, and often excluded. Yet it was during these difficult years that he developed the qualities that would shape the rest of his life: discipline, independence, and an almost unbreakable ambition. Later, Hans Wilsdorf reflected on this period with the words, "Looking back, I believe that a large part of my success came from having to take responsibility for myself at an early age." While other children were playing, Hans preferred to lose himself in books. Languages and mathematics fascinated him in particular. He became fluent in English and French, skills that would later open the doors to the international business world. At the time, no one could have imagined that this quiet boy would one day create a global luxury brand. During his school years, Hans befriended a Swiss classmate. This friend often told him about a special city in Switzerland, La Chaux-de-Fonds. At the time, it was already regarded as the heart of Swiss watchmaking. To Hans, the place sounded like another world, a world of precision, mechanics, and elegance. The stories fascinated him so much that they sparked a dream within him. One day he wanted to go there himself, and that is exactly what he did. At just 19 years old, Hans left Germany and moved to Switzerland. His new life began in Geneva, where he initially worked for an international pearl trading company. There, he learned something crucial. The most successful companies did not necessarily manufacture their own products. Often the key was knowing how to market quality effectively. This insight would later play a central role in Rolex's success. But although the job paid well, his fascination with watches never left him. Then one day Hans received an offer that would change his life, a position at a major watch company in La Chaux-de-Fonds, the place he had dreamed about for years. Without hesitation, he accepted. There, he worked as an English correspondent and office clerk. But something else was far more important. For the first time, he gained direct insight into the world of watchmaking. Every day, he inspected hundreds of pocket watches. He learned how movements worked, how precision was achieved, and why some watches were superior to others. Hans absorbed this knowledge eagerly. He quickly realized that watches were far more than simple timekeeping devices. They were miniature technical masterpieces. But soon his career was interrupted. After only 2 years, he had to return to Germany to complete his military service. Afterward, he moved to London, and it was there that the real story of Rolex began. At the beginning of the 20th century, London was one of the most important commercial centers in the world. Hans once again worked for a watch company, this time in sales. And once again, his extraordinary talent became apparent. Within a short time, he acquired new customers and significantly increased sales. Yet while he worked for other companies during the day, at night he was already thinking about his own future. Because Hans Wilsdorf had a vision that almost no one took seriously at the time. He believed in the future of the wristwatch. Today, that sounds obvious. But in the early 20th century, wristwatches were considered unreliable and fragile. Most men carried pocket watches. Wristwatches were viewed more as jewelry for women. They were small, delicate, and often inaccurate. Many experts were convinced that wristwatches would never become widely accepted. But Hans thought differently. He was convinced that one day people would want to wear their watches conveniently on their wrists. And more than that, he believed that wristwatches could eventually become just as precise as the finest pocket watches of their era. This idea became his mission. In 1905, Hans and his brother-in-law Alfred Davis founded their own company in London, Wilsdorf and Davis. The company imported high-quality Swiss mechanism inside the watch into England and fitted them into elegant cases. From the very beginning, Hans was uncompromising when it came to quality, but there was still one thing missing: a name that sounded modern, luxurious, international, short enough to fit on a watch dial. After countless attempts, he finally found a word that felt perfect: Rolex, short, powerful, and easy to pronounce in almost every language in the world. In 1908, Hans Wilsdorf officially registered the name, without knowing that it would one day become the most famous watch brand in the world. Then came the First World War, and suddenly everything changed. Soldiers needed watches that could be read quickly and easily. Pocket watches became increasingly impractical during wartime. Wristwatches, on the other hand, offered a tremendous advantage, and it was here that Rolex began to rise. Hans Wilsdorf's robust and precise watches proved exceptionally reliable in the war. More and more people began to recognize the potential of the wristwatch. Slowly, Hans's great vision was becoming reality. In 1910, a Rolex wristwatch received the world's first official chronometer certificate for a wristwatch, a historic moment. For the first time, a wristwatch had officially demonstrated the same level of precision as high-grade marine chronometers. For Rolex, it was a breakthrough, but Hans wanted more, much more. He wanted to create the perfect wristwatch, a watch that was precise, elegant, and at the same time robust enough for everyday life. The greatest challenge was water. Even the smallest amount of moisture could destroy a mechanism inside the watch. For years, Rolex worked on a solution. Then in 1926, an innovation appeared that would revolutionize the entire watch industry: the Rolex Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch. Its hermetically sealed case protected the delicate movement from water, dust, and dirt. It was a technological milestone. But Hans Wilsdorf knew a great invention alone was not enough. People needed to hear about it, and this is where his true genius emerged. Not only as a watchmaker, but as a marketing visionary. In 1927, Hans Wilsdorf heard about a young British swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze. She planned to swim across the English Channel, a life-threatening challenge in icy waters. For Hans, it was the perfect opportunity. He persuaded her to wear a Rolex Oyster around her neck during the swim. For more than 10 hours, Mercedes battled through the freezing waves. Although she ultimately had to be pulled from the water exhausted, the watch continued to function perfectly. For Hans Wilsdorf, it was a triumph. Rolex immediately placed a large advertisement in the London Daily Mail. The message was clear: Rolex had created the world's first truly waterproof wristwatch. The public was fascinated. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Rolex, and Hans went one step further. Rolex displayed its watches in water-filled aquariums in store windows. Passers-by stopped to watch genuine Rolex watches running underwater. For the time, it was revolutionary marketing, and it worked perfectly. Rolex became famous around the world, not only as an elegant luxury brand, but as a symbol of reliability and technical innovation. In the years that followed, Rolex continued to develop the wristwatch. In 1931, the company introduced its next major innovation, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, the world's first waterproof wristwatch with automatic self-winding. Until then, watches had to be wound by hand on a regular basis. Rolex developed a rotating mechanism inside the watch that wound itself through the movement of the wearer's wrist, a principle still used in nearly every automatic watch today. Once again, Rolex had transformed the watch industry, and once again, Hans Wilsdorf was ahead of his time. While other companies focused mainly on jewelry watches, Rolex began creating specialized tools for specific professions and adventures. In the 1950s, some of the most famous models in watchmaking history were born. In 1953, Rolex introduced the Submariner, the world's first professional diving watch, water-resistant to 100 meters deep, robust, precise, and instantly iconic. The Submariner essentially defined the entire category of modern dive watches. To this day, countless manufacturers take inspiration from its design. Soon afterward came the GMT Master, a watch specifically developed for pilots traveling across different time zones. Then came the Explorer, inspired by the conquest of Mount Everest, and finally the Daytona, a watch for racing drivers that would later become one of the most sought-after luxury watches of all time. Rolex achieved something few brands had ever accomplished, the fusion of technical functionality and pure luxury. Yet behind all these successes stood the same man, Hans Wilsdorf, a perfectionist. He believed that every smallest detail mattered. For him, a Rolex could never be merely good enough. It had to be perfect. That philosophy continues to shape the company today. Rolex still manufactures a large portion of its components in-house, from the mechanism inside the watch to gold alloys. Even Rolex's famous stainless steel alloy is regarded as exceptionally high quality and durable. For Hans Wilsdorf, quality always came above everything else, and that is precisely how the Rolex myth was created. While many luxury brands rely heavily on fashion, Rolex built something far more powerful: trust. People knew a Rolex worked, whether on a mountain summit, underwater, or at a motor race. Rolex watches accompanied expeditions to Mount Everest, divers into the depths of the oceans, and record-setting drivers on racetracks around the world. The brand became a symbol of human achievement, and that is what made Rolex unique. In 1944, Hans Wilsdorf suffered a devastating personal loss. His wife Florence passed away. The couple had no children. To secure the company's future, Hans established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. Later, he transferred all Rolex shares to the foundation. As a result, Rolex is still not owned by any individual and is not publicly traded. The company operates independently, and it is precisely this independence that allows Rolex to think long-term without compromise, not quarter by quarter, but generation by generation. Hans Wilsdorf died in 1960 at the age of 79, but his legacy lived on. In the decades following his death, Rolex became the world's most recognized luxury watch brand. Few watches today possess a comparable level of brand recognition. The crown on the dial became a global symbol of success, and although Rolex now produces hundreds of thousands of watches every year, demand often far exceeds supply. Many models have waiting lists stretching for years. Some vintage Rolex watches now sell for millions at auction. What began with an orphan boy from Bavaria became a global empire. But perhaps the true secret of Rolex is not simply gold, precision, or luxury. Perhaps it is an idea. The idea that a wristwatch can be more than just a tool for telling time. A Rolex tells a story of ambition, of success, of adventure, and above all, of a man who refused to accept the limitations of his time. Hans Wilsdorf believed in something that others laughed at, and it was precisely that belief that changed the world of watches forever. Today, everyone knows the name Rolex, but behind the most famous watch in the world still stands the story of a boy who once lost everything and turned that loss into something immortal.